Please welcome to the stage CEO of Cloud Foundry, Sam Ramji.
Good morning. Good to see all of you. How's the coffee working? Kicking in? This is always sort of the slow lull as you've been sitting isolated in your chairs, trying to figure out what the next thing is going to be and marshaling your attention. I'm going to talk about Linux and open source beyond the tipping point and pick up on some of the themes you've heard this morning. I thought Aaron did an outstanding job raising our sights to developers and development. I am the CEO of Cloud Foundry Foundation. It is a new foundation and an existing open source project. Most importantly, it's part of the Linux Foundation. It is a Linux Foundation collaborative project. So we get to have a voice in a range of different open source projects. It's important because this has been an age of open source for at least a decade. Open source itself has been around for at least 2 decades or more, depending on how you count it. But it's true that we're in an age of foundations. Every single graphic you see up here, every logo, is represented by a foundation to create large-scale collaborative development. Some of these are brand new in the last 12 months. The Node Foundation, Drone Code, the .NET Foundation, Cloud Foundry, all individually multi-million-dollar foundations, governing hundreds of millions of dollars in development, supporting multi-billion-dollar markets. So these are crucial, and these lessons that we've learned across how do you do good governance, how do we have optimism, how do we have transparency, how do we have transparency, how do we do management of competition as well as collaboration at scale. That's one of the things that very few people touch. Co-opetition is real. Everyone who opens and creates interoperability and thinks they're giving something away also wonders, how do I keep my company going? But you can keep companies going on this. And in fact, we now, this year, have our second Red Hat. We've been asking for a while, when will we have another purely open source, publicly traded company? Hortonworks went public last fall with a $1 billion IPO, right? This is a great hallmark of what's new in open source. Not only is open source no longer replicating older technologies, but completely brand new problems are being solved, such as the Hadoop ecosystem. Hadoop, Hive, HDFS, solving for big data analytics at scale. Hortonworks has built their business on that, has already gone public, but it's not just Hortonworks. Cloudera, who many of you have heard about, have just released their earnings for the first time. As a privately held company, this is fairly unusual, but the growth is so good that they felt that it was important to do this to show the commercial success of open source today in big data. So 100% growth, over $100 million in annual revenue already, nearly brand new company, and 60% of that revenue is subscription revenue. That's very, very good numbers for those investors who are looking at how do we build an open source business model, how do we enable commercialization of these types of technologies at scale. So there are models and lessons here made available. In the late 2000s, I had the privilege of running open source for Microsoft. Now, clearly, the company's come a long way. This is certainly a quote that would not have happened when I was working for Steve Ballmer back in the day. But Satya Nadella has clearly grasped the future of computing and turned the company toward it. This quote that Microsoft loves Linux is absolutely stunning. Now, clearly, they're well represented here as a member of the Open Compute Foundation. They're also part of Node. They're working, they've open sourced .NET, which is a huge change for them. They've created the .NET Foundation. So if any last bastion existed in the world of believing that proprietary development only was the way to go, then this slide, if nothing else, should convince you that that time is gone. Microsoft loves Linux. You can trust it. It comes directly from the CEO. He stated this last year. Successful companies built on open source do so because they're able to capture innovation and add their own value faster. So GoPro, a hero brand, probably the preeminent social media marketing brand that you've seen, the Space Jump, the Red Bull advertisements, they built their entire system on top of Linux because it was able to take their core hardware and get them up to user-level experiences much faster than they could have done any other way. This is sort of the key to open source innovation and powering commercial business models. You have to add your value, but if you are thoughtful about what's available for you in open source, you can get there much faster. Tesla is a great example of a state-of-the-art dashboard and console. Again, probably the best in-dash digital console experience of any car company on the planet right now, almost entirely based on open source. And if you want to go and have that experience, just drive a little ways up the road to their facility at Fremont while you're here in the Bay Area, and you'll be able to get the tour and take a look at this. But it's not just Tesla. It's also Jaguar Land Rover. It's Toyota. There's an entire open source project on top of Linux called AGL, Automotive Grade Linux. So the ability to share best practices, to be able to share the source code that implements those best practices, enables each company to differentiate themselves based on what they're uniquely wonderful at. So that's the nature of open source contribution. But none of you necessarily are in the car business. You're in the IT business, and IT infrastructure, as you know, has changed. We're not running mainframes on tape drives anymore. We've moved to cloud computing. Almost every single thing that you see in cloud computing is open source. When we think about what defines the cloud, we're looking at things like CoreOS and Docker, right? The open source projects are actually defining the market segments now. What is containerization? It's a set of open source projects built on Linux, right? The operating system for cloud workloads. Cloud Stack and OpenStack, defining infrastructure as a service. Cloud Foundry and OpenShift, defining platform as a service. Networking with Open Daylight and OPNFV. I'll come back to all of these, but the aliveness, the innovation, the active sharing, and the creation of new value is happening right here, right now in these stacks. And we will continue to drive it forward through foundations that can help you govern them effectively. One good example is that the Linux Foundation has now released numbers on contribution to the Linux kernel. We have more first-time contributors than ever before in the last 12 months. Over 4,000 developers contributed to Linux, nearly half of whom were first-time contributors. That's an amazing statistic. It tells you that Linux is far from solved because as we keep building new hardware, you need to keep modifying the operating system, extending and expanding it in a way that is most efficiently done by open platforms and open operating systems. Companies are vying for the top spot. You'll see that this top 15 contributors list changes constantly over time. Intel and Red Hat constantly swapping places. You can see that this is a way to make your mark on the industry, to be able to make sure that you have control over your future, and make sure that your commercial plans are coherent with where the community is going, so you can reduce your own unnecessary additional effort. One thing that I call out here that's important for all open communities to pay attention to is we've long underrepresented women. So the FOSS outreach program for women identified 24 key potential contributors, created sponsorships and fellowships starting about 12 months ago. Just by the end of the year, this group of 24 interns had already reached the top 15 contributor slots because they were engaged, they were partnered up with mentors from the kernel community, people who were already kernel contributors and kernel leaders, with the explicit goal of saying, let's provide some enablement here. So I think it's fantastic. It's a terrific outcome, hopefully a pointer to where other communities can go to be more open and heterogeneous. Bridges are valuable. Open source projects are the roads and the bridges of the internet. Those of you who are in the Bay Area or who have driven here in the last week will know that there's a brand new bridge stretching from San Francisco to Oakland. It's built for $6.5 billion because bridges have value. If you drive up to Napa while you're here, you'll cross the northbound I-680, built for $1.3 billion almost 10 years ago. So we can claim open source now creates billions of dollars of value and touches all of our lives. There's no way that you live through every day without using a tremendous amount of open source. You just don't even have to pay attention to it, much as Aaron was saying. You're sitting inside the cockpit of a car, you don't know it. So we could claim we've reached a golden age of open source. Or have we? Anybody recognize this logo? Yeah, somebody said Heartbleed. Okay, so that's interesting. When a security exploit has brand presence, right, you know that you have a certain class of problems. Here are a few other brand presences. So the entire core infrastructure of the internet is based on open source, but we haven't been doing as good a job as we need to take care of it. There was a range of very serious vulnerabilities that were identified, tacked, solved for, but it created huge windows, huge instability. It's not just an open source problem. Clearly, we've had these kinds of zero-day vulnerabilities in proprietary products for a long time, but we need to make sure that we're working together to make open source secure. So if Linus's law is true that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, why do we have all these problems? When we look at how we've been building the internet, does anybody know who this is? This is Harlan Sten. He is the timekeeper of the internet. Anybody know NTP, right? Network Time Protocol? He was making less than $25,000 a year. This was his full-time job, just scraping by, right? Imagine Father Time, right? Scraping by on $25,000 a year. This is how you make sure that all of your clocks in sync so that you avoid an entire class of security exploits. You have Werner Cook in Germany, GNU PG. GNU PG is not just for personal email encryption, but this is how we know software packages are what they claim to be. They are signed with the correct public key, going broke. The OpenSSL team, who became famous because of the Heartbleed exploit, they were getting less than $2,000 a year in donations. Unbelievable. They met for the first time on a Linux Foundation sponsorship last year, right, getting together in person to solve for some of the architectural challenges they had. Here's Theo Rod, OpenSSH. If you've ever gone into a box and tried to configure it securely, you've been using this code, right? Working part-time jobs to make ends meet. And Chet Ramey, maintainer of Bash, anybody who's using modern shells is certainly using Bash, working nearly alone. So what are we doing about it? This is a very famous moment in American history. This bridge was the most traveled in Minnesota. This is the I-35 West. But August 1st, 2007, it collapsed, killing 13 people. This is not something that we're very happy about. Heartbleed was the I-35 West of open source. It allowed us to galvanize attention, attract people to think about solving this problem. It's a hard problem because software is complex. Secure code is hard to write and maintain. One of the reasons Windows Vista was late a decade ago was not because it was badly engineered, quite the opposite. Every developer had to go through security training, a secure development lifecycle led by an industry visionary, Michael Howard. He pointed out to us that all of you developers, you know how to add features and do things so that they run the way they're supposed to. You don't know how to make them not run the way they're not supposed to. It's a completely different discipline of software engineering. And then finally, because we want to be able to fix open source market failures without screwing up what's made us work. So we can fix it because we share the same software code. We can leverage shared testing environments, so even if you're not going to contribute to the code, you can certainly contribute defects. Everybody is paying attention to these, large-scale CVEs, registries, abilities to deliver this information. And we can share best practices so it can be easier to write secure code. So we're attacking the problem by creating the Core Infrastructure Initiative. So what is the CII? CII is all about taking a preemptive approach to cybersecurity. It does three things. First, helps projects in need. So all those projects I described before, they are now receiving funding, money, attention at a scale that would make you not embarrassed, that allows you to know that you have the right people enabled to solve hard problems. Second, conducting a security census. The Core Infrastructure Census is about finding what are all the projects that we're relying on that we've never even taken a look at to understand their core security vulnerabilities and getting ahead of this problem the second time. And then third, establishing secure development best practices. We have tremendous funding from industry giants, and the challenge may be to ask yourself how you can help. So you can point out projects that are in trouble. You can point out projects that haven't been maintained that you're depending on, that you're concerned about. You can take hold of the Core Infrastructure Census and improve it. What are the questions that aren't asked that should be asked? And finally, you can get your company to join the Core Infrastructure Initiative and be part of making the internet and the cloud that we're relying on secure from end to end. So let me close on a different note. Now that we've hopefully taken some responsibility for each of our contribution to the problem and the solution for security, let's ask the question, how far can open source go? Clearly, I picked this image because I think it can go way over the horizon farther than we can imagine. We're still in the 10-yard line for open source in this century. Taking just a subset of projects here, Docker, Cloud Foundry, Node, probably all of you have heard of these projects. Xen, certainly you know Open Compute, probably Open Daylight for software-defined networking, probably OPNFV for network function virtualization, and OpenStack, of course. If we allow these to just sort of evolve on their own, we don't know exactly where it's going to go, but they'll certainly go somewhere great. But if we seek harmony, if we start asking ourselves, what would a top-to-bottom open compute stack look like for the global cloud? How can we create an open cloud computing platform for everybody on the planet for the rest of the century and beyond? It might look something like this. So consider this a call to action, right? If we start thinking about our dependence on hardware and opening hardware, our dependence on carrier networking, which is invisible to many people, and make that open. As we look at software-defined networking so that we can make all these different components work correctly, as we can orchestrate them naturally. Data center operating systems, virtual machines that sit on top of that. Operating systems like Linux, long open, but how do we harmonize new things like Cloud Foundry so that you can have an application developer building apps that naturally communicate with hints all through the stack so that this entire set of infrastructure can respond dynamically and adapt to what you need. Containers like Docker and programming frameworks like Node. These are just a few examples of what the core stack could be, but let's start raising this concept. Let's raise our imagination, and let's find a way to create an open cloud platform. So if we do that, I believe we will, in fact, make this a golden age of open source. So I thank you very much for your time and attention. Congratulations on the success of Open Compute, and have a great day.